This will be a tape recording of the annual New York dinner at the Union League Club in New York City on April 4th, 1974, honoring Ed Douglas.
That is the United States and all. And this, as you might have guessed, is the Lincoln Room. And a lot of important gatherings have taken place in this room, including such things as the formation of the Red Cross and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, where that leads us tonight, I'm not entirely clear. I'm clear on one thing, that the only reason that I was asked to be your toast person was because I'm the only Republican that you can find in New York City today. And one of my best friends says who hasn't been indicted. And the only one who remembers Calvin Coolidge very clearly, and his advice to all people in my circumstance. And Calvin Coolidge's words were, if you don't say anything, you won't be asked to repeat it. So basically, really, my task is not to say anything, but just to try to move the show along. However, like every ex-politician, I can't resist an opportunity to just say a little bit. And I do think it's my task to greet you, and that I do with great enthusiasm. You know, the forsythia is out in the park, and the magnolias are out in the park, and the oil drum that is painted orange and has salt on it is now being used as a garbage can. So by these signs I can tell you that it is spring. It's also spring because all of us are together again. And we do this every spring, and I think this is probably, for me anyhow, the most moving rite of spring. It's a time when all of us get together. You know, all men have a bond, a sense of mutuality, of communication. I guess that's what sets us apart from the other animals, to the extent that we get that set apart. And right tonight is one of those expressions of that special bond. We share, each one of us together, a very treasured portion of our lives with people that we loved then and that we've grown to love. I'm speaking now of the masters. That we have grown to love in the years intervening from the time that we were at Taft. I think we become older and they become more reasonable and understanding. Well, anyhow, the point of it all is that here tonight, this is a unique gathering of very dear, close friends. It all goes to show that Ben Jonson was right. He said the feeling of friendship is like that of being comfortably filled with roast beef. And it works, I think, just as well with chicken. Well, the purpose of the exercise, obviously, is to renew that friendship, our belief in each other, our belief in a particular institution, our school, and most particularly, our belief in a very special man, Ed Douglas. Now, our nameless and faceless committee has been adroitly manipulated by Fred Genung, and we have a kaleidoscope of Taft to offer you tonight. The first on this hit parade is a fellow who is very used to the man who speech. This is a man who is, God save the mark, a practicing Democrat and an active campaigner for office. He's a monitor in 1938. He's a Princetonian, but his outreach has continued beyond that period. He is a publisher, a broadcaster, but I guess most of all, he's a very caring person. This is a man who was grievously wounded by a landmine in 1945 when he was volunteering as a forward artillery observer in Cologne, or near Cologne. A former Taft baseball player and football player who was the founder of a great organization here in our town called JOB, Just One Break, probably one of the most effective organizations serving the handicapped. It's a fellow who cares so much about life and about the people of our community. This is hard to believe, but he actually sought the office of Comptroller of the City of New York. His activities include the President's Committee on the Handicapped, the Advisory Committee on Economic Cooperation Administration, the New York State Commission on Discrimination. He was an advisor to the U.S. delegation to the UN Commerce on Trade and Business. He's president of the New York City Committee for Public Higher Education, translated into political terms, which we would never do. Of course, that means free tuition. He's been a teacher. He is now president of the board of an exciting educational institution in our town, the New School. He was a marcher, or at least a limper, at Montgomery, at the march in Alabama. He's been a visitor to Vietnam. He is secretary of the American Jewish Committee. He's therefore a man of many, many parts. While he was doing all of these things, he recognized the obvious deficiency of his Princeton education. And in 1956 got an MA from NYU in history, and followed that by a PhD in 1961 in the same area. This is an extraordinary, dedicated alumnus of our school, and by now, of course, you all know, it's Orrin Lehman.
Bob, thank you very much for that glowing introduction. I think you must have turned Democrat, your boss did, so well, maybe you had too. But I do want to say that I had written and made some notes on sort of a eulogy for Ed Douglas. I don't know why, because I took a look at him tonight, which of course I've seen him recently, and I realize he's got more hair than I do, and he looks like he could have been in the class of 1950 or something like that. So you don't look anything like Mr. Chips, Ed, and you perhaps should. I was supposed to talk to a couple of fellows that were in the class above me at Taft, which was years ago, Bert Rowley and Dave Ork, and they pleaded with me to give a very long speech about the history and the future of prep school education. But and I was going to do that too. Told him I might do it in an hour and a half. But I happened to go upstairs with Michael Rosenbaum, and he said that he was going to give a very short speech. He thought that was the best thing, so I think maybe he's right. And I took his advice anyway. I think he's right. I heard the Orinoco's say something about Ed Douglas throwing erasers at people in class. He's mellowed a great deal, because when I was there, he used to throw chalk. It was a lot more dangerous. And I remember sort of ducking as he threw it at a young man named Eaton, whom I think you've probably forgotten because he didn't last long at Taft. I'm not sure whether he flunked out or got hit in the eye, but one way or the other, he wasn't there very long. And he was right behind me, so I was ducking him all the time. But as Bob mentioned, I did run for office, and I've never done very well with the voters, and that goes all the way back to senior voting at Taft. When everybody votes the fellow that did most for Taft, and the best athlete, and the best student, and all that sort of stuff. But I had the, I guess, somewhat dubious distinction of winning, and I might say by a landslide, the vote for the worst drag with the faculty. I'm not sure they still call it drag, but anyway, whatever it was back in my day. So really, for over about a little more than 30 years now, I say 30, but it's probably a lot more than that, I've looked forward with almost maniacal anticipation for the chance to tell my side of the story. But now that the time has come and I really have my big chance, I must have mellowed, because when I think back and reminisce and everything else, I seem to have mostly, not all, but mostly warm and kindly thoughts about the faculty, but particularly about Ed Douglas. I remember that very well now, that when I was a freshman, I was terribly in awe of Dougie because he was the confidant, advisor, and a friend to an array of large and enormous-looking senior athletes in the class of 1935, who in my lower mid-eyes sort of seemed to combine all the more sterling attributes of Jack Nicklaus and O.J. Simpson and Tom Seaver. And I guess maybe they did. I think we beat Hotchkiss at you 47-0 or something like that. But in other words, Ed Douglas was the hero's hero. But it really wasn't until my senior year that I found out why. That year I went out for track, which, of course, as all of you know, was coached by our guest of honor. And here I learned firsthand why so many people that had been athletes that worked, or at least gone out for sports, had held him in such very high regard. Because he was a good coach and a strong leader. But more than that, I think he was really concerned about all of us as individuals. And if any of us had a problem, I think we all felt that we could go to him, not as a master, but as a real friend. I think, however, that the true measure of my affection for Ed Douglas lies in the fact that I'm here tonight at all. Because in about 12 years of school, that is grammar school and high school, and 8 years of college and graduate school, I flunked only one course, and that was Ed Douglas's lower mid algebra. Greater love hath no man. But I must say that Ed, rather typically of him, didn't just let me go back a grade, which I might easily have done, but he took me in hand and tutored me and gave me another test. The only thing that irritated me, he didn't give me the answers. But I think I flunked with about a 50 and I passed with about a 61. So I went on to the middle class. So thank you, Ed. Not long ago, I read in the papyrus that Ed Douglas had chosen to become a master at Taft because of the warmth and wit and charm and twinkle of Horace Taft. Well, of course, I came to school for the very same reason, and so did, I think, thousands of others. But when Horace Taft chose Ed Douglas, he really chose a winner. I know that Taft has meant a great deal to Ed Douglas, but certainly no more than Ed has meant to Taft. So, Dougie. Dougie, good luck to you, and thanks for everything. And I know that the one thing that makes us all happy about your retirement is the fact that you're going to live in Watertown. We'll all be seeing a lot of you. Thank you very much.
You know, one of the great things about our institution is that we have a virtually inexhaustible supply of Tafts. They come from all points of the compass. As a matter of fact, we even have some homegrown Tafts. Lloyd, sitting over there, is one such. We also have another one from Washington, D.C., and obviously all of you came to hear the distinguished senator from Ohio, Robert A. Taft, Jr., former chairman of our board. It is now my painful duty to tell you that the press of legislative duties, too horrendous for me as a good Republican to even conceive of, has made it impossible for him to join us. And for that, he's most sorry, and obviously all of us, his friends, are likewise. It had been my intention to introduce him to you as my candidate for the President of the United States. There may be some kind of a plus in it, though, because Perhaps some of the younger alumni don't know Bob Taft, and so what the hell, we didn't lose that much. On the other hand, it may be that some of the younger alumni don't even know that there ever was a Horace Dutton Taft. Well, there was. And oddly enough, there is. The current Horace Taft is nationally recognized as an outstanding physicist. He was one of those fellows that was forced to make a very tough decision, because on the one hand was a preeminence which was recognized in the academic world in his chosen field, which was quite unique. And on the other was his desire to be with, to serve, to work with young people, and in particular the college generation. He opted, at least temporarily, for the latter course, Master of Davenport College at Yale, and is now Dean of Yale College. And my reports from that institution, which I must say are a little spotty, but I think very authoritative, indicate that he's probably one of the most trusted and uniquely respected members of the faculty, members of the Yale institution, one of those who is, well, you see, there are others who have gotten the word as well. He's no mean guitarist. If Horace Dutton Taft was called the King, as I understand he was, I think this Horace Taft should be termed the Crown Prince. Or maybe even better, I guess I can say that he is also my candidate for president. Maybe in this instance of Yale University. Horace Taft.
I'm extremely grateful for this testimonial dinner on behalf of myself. Bob should understand that the supply of Tafts is inexhaustible, but exhausted. I learned last night that not only was my brother tied up, but that the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Harmer Brereton, who wanted very much to be here, had been laid low by the flu. So what I have to tell you tonight is partially written by others and partially written by myself. I will leave it to you from the tone of voice, the degree of personal commitment to the language to decipher which is which. But the first thing I would like to do is to read a telegram from Harmer Brereton, who really is sorry not to be here. It's addressed to Mr. Lance Auden, headmaster, Taft School dinner, and so on. Please convey to Ed Douglas the depth of my disappointment not to be present to honor him. Nothing but the virulence of somebody else's flu bug could render me helpless to participate in your splendid Taft gathering. Ed's influence on generations of Taft students and on the school itself are indelible. Add our best wishes to the chorus of Ed's friends, Harmer and Eleanor Brereton. The Board of Trustees of the school, which I've been honored to serve as vice chairman for several years, has prepared a statement about Ed Douglas, which, as I have mentioned, I will interrupt in the middle to insert my own remarks. But I'd like to read you this statement. As surely as the sun rises over Paris Island, Edwin Douglas has stood as an effective and kind, firm molder of 1,000 boys and some girls. He is universally admired by fellow preceptors, by parents, and by students. With unswerving excellence as mathematician, pedagogue, administrator, counselor, friend, master of plain speech and job assembly, and straight shooter, Dougie has made a lasting mark. He is molded well. But Ed's service and enviable reputation have extended, of course, far beyond Watertown. The variety of places where students, alumni, and parents are found. For his equal skill and adeptness as a mathematician's mathematician, a pedagogue of pedagogues, this is not my language, administrator of administrators, a prominent Episcopal layman, not only master of job assembly, but also, as he reminds us often, master sergeant of formation assemblies, Ed is known and respected and held in high affection. The Dean has earned many times over the retirement he has chosen to take, and has rewarded all of us who have been privileged to work with him and for him far more and in far more ways, though he may not agree, than we could ever return. There will be a pause here, and I'd like to say a few personal remarks. As the last surviving faculty member who was hired by Horace Dutton Taft, Ed Douglas has never really had to prove his staying power. It was obvious that here was a person that the school could not afford to lose. When you last a long time in an academic institution, it is either because you are superb at what you do or because you have tenure. It is very lucky that Ed Douglas is a superb schoolmaster, because I don't like to think what his response might have been to anyone who might have tried to fire him. But he has not been only a faculty member, but a faculty leader, and has represented the best characteristics of the private secondary school in the eyes of the students, faculty, and the alumni. I can't claim that I remember every detail that I learned from you, Ed, but I am most grateful to you, and particularly to Moose Wilson, for guiding me to a little green book called Introduction to the Calculus, a book which I was convinced contained all of the secrets of the universe, and I was probably right. But I'm also tremendously grateful to you for the 30 years since I left Taft, for giving the school a kind of a personal identity, a face and a manner which has reassured alumni that our own fondly remembered experience was still shared by our children now at Taft. In both senses of the word, Ed, you became the school, and we will miss you terribly. One warning, however, may be appropriate. 2 years ago, Renee Welleck, the chairman of Yale's Department of Comparative Literature, retired from our faculty. At a party about 6 months later, someone asked him how he enjoyed his retirement. "Very much," said Welleck, "but I certainly do miss the vacations." I am confident, Ed, that your life will be so full that you too will look at your retirement days as even more arduous than before. And we hope that that remains true a long, long time. Each and every member of the Board of Trustees joins in the confident hope that Ed will continue to conduct his activities in retirement with the same enthusiasm, energy, and concern for others that have characterized his entire career. We add our respective and sincere wishes for Ed's everlasting good health and unbounded happiness, to be shared, of course, with his devoted Jean, who has so patiently shared him with Taft. May God bless the Douglases. Thank you.
Once again, our next speaker will follow Horace Taft. I met our next...
You were going to introduce me now?
I first met this fellow who's complaining a little bit in the summer of 1936. That was a time when I was on the brink of going to the Taft School as a lower middler, and through a little pull and influence, I had worked up this meeting with him on Martha's Vineyard, and I figured that would give me a little edge on everybody else. It didn't quite work out that way, but it left a lasting impression because he was then, as he is now, calm, handsome, strong. I think, though I didn't know it at the time, there may have been a few butterflies in his stomach at that fall of 1936. But if there were, no one knew it. What he did with the Taft School, he smoothed it, strengthened it, and led it for over 25 years. I think our next speaker is the embodiment of what Alfred North Whitehead had to say about a free society, and that was that the art of free society consists in the maintenance of the symbolic code, and secondly, in the fearlessness of revision. The societies which cannot combine reverence to their symbols with freedom of revision must ultimately decay. Well, this fellow maintained the code, but made us all unafraid of revision. Our beloved Paul Cruikshank.
This is such a wonderful occasion tonight. And I can't tell you how it warms our hearts, Mrs. Cruikshank's and mine, to see the faces of all you old boys, to see how... Excuse me, that's a quote. And your wives. And to see and to know what you are doing in life, what you are contributing, what kind of people and men you've developed into. But to see you again means so much to us. And you won't believe this, I'm sure, but each person I see, each face I see, and I recall as a boy, and I haven't seen one boy here tonight about whom I didn't have a very happy memory. Mr. Janan asked me if I would just get up on my feet and speak, just say a few words, and he limited me. He said, you can have 3 or 4 minutes. Well, that was very generous of him. I'm going to take 4. This occasion tonight conjures up, Edith and me, a most important happening just 11 years ago this month, when we had at the Plaza alumni and parent party for us on the eve of our retirement. Del Ladd and his wife Sis, Dave Taylor and his wife Nancy, and I think Phil Snyder and Francis. Probably were a couple of other men and wives involved in the creation of this idea. But those were the principal people involved in its implementation. I feel a little guilty as I encroach on, if that's the word, impinge on Ed's occasion tonight, because this is for Ed, of course. But I think he'll forgive me if I do inject just a little personal note. I never felt after that occasion, or at that occasion, that I really had an appropriate opportunity to express our thanks to those people who were responsible for that occasion, and to the hundreds of people who came there, made such effort to be there for that occasion. It was probably the most eventful, the most meaningful happening to us in our lives. And through the years, we've so savored that night, that experience, and still do. And so tonight makes me a little nostalgic and mindful of that occasion. We had the same urbane, warm, witty Toastmaster that we had tonight. We also had one of my younger brothers, Earl, who was added a great deal with his wry, warm, younger brother, quote, humor. And Mason Gross with his usual, always brilliance. It was a spectacular evening. As I said, it was probably the high spot of our professional and career lives. And I just am so happy to have this opportunity to thank all of you who were there, all of you who were responsible for that happening. It was a wonderful thing for us. Ed Douglas well deserves this occasion, which is meant to honor him, and all these occasions that have been happening all over the country to honor him. Just to have been at Taft School 43 years, that's an accomplishment in itself and calls for really loud praise. Another thing that's rather meaningful, Ed survived and endured 4 headmasters. Now, most stories about headmasters really are apocryphal. But let's say they're not. We'll have to admit that they probably are a little queer. A queer group. I surely felt that way coming down the car this afternoon. Dick Lovelace nicely drove us down, which is so kind to do. But as soon as I got in the car, I just told him he should stop here because the traffic is bad. He said, "Oh, does this take me back 20 years?" All I said was, "It's a dangerous corner." And through these years, there's no doubt about it, no question, Ed has been an outstanding teacher and an outstanding administrator. Always exciting as a teacher, always vigorous. Do I mean vigorous or do I mean violent? Well, if your imaginations are functioning well and they're stimulated, picture of 43 years, 4 classes a day, 6 days a week, 15 to 18 boys in the class, and if you could put them down end to end, how far would those erasers stretch? But Ed not only served Taft School beautifully, generously, and most effectively, but he contributed most generously outside the walls of the school. At Princeton, where he ran for a couple of years, summer school, at Yale, where he worked and had an administrative job in their summer school, some colleges in the Midwest, on the far West, where he functioned, on the college board, on the Commission of Mathematics, on other national commissions on mathematics. So Ed was known nationwide and known with respect and with great regard. All of this, of course, reflected so well on, not just on him, but on the school from which he came. His accomplishments were many. And even now, as he retires, on the eve of his retirement, he has just been drafted to become the president of the Connecticut Association of Independent Schools, a most important assignment. Curiously, one of the things, or the thing perhaps, that has impressed me through the years more than any one distinctive item about this man is this. You all have known men, women too, perhaps who at 25 he hit his peak. At 30 or 35 he hit his peak and leveled off. Or 40, 45. But most impressive to me has been this man's growth and development. He never stopped growing, never stopped developing. So now, as he's on the eve of his retirement, his stature is higher than it has ever been before. He has been, and he is. And I can't say anything more meaningful or that carries more weight as far as I'm concerned than to say this. He has been and is a great schoolmaster.
Well, youth must be served. You know, every day I feel, and I suspect I begin to look more and more like George Bernard Shaw. I haven't gotten the beard, but the mustache is getting a little long, and somebody said to me, gee, I remember you, to this cocktails, you know, supposed to be pleasant cocktails. Somebody comes up to me and says, gee, I remember you when your mustache was all black. You remember Shaw's comment when he was seated at dinner and there was a lady next to him who said, they were chatting, and she said, what a wonderful thing it is. What a wonderful thing is youth. And Shaw replied and said, yes, what a crime to waste it on young people. Well, one of the young people that's with us tonight, you'll recognize it's a person upon whom youth is not wasted. And that's Michael Rosenbaum, the class of 77, the product of 2 generations of exposure to Ed Douglas.
As you can see from the speakers list, I am from the last class Mr. Douglas will ever teach. To be asked to make a speech like this as one of the youngest members in the Taft community is the greatest honor I can ever receive. Since I am one of the shortest at Taft, my speech will reflect this. My first day at Taft was hectic, but when I walked into my geometry class and saw Mr. Douglas, everything seemed a bit better. Mr. Douglas told us that he had written the book we were using this year. For once, the students can see what these authors are trying to teach us. Mr. Douglas started to talk about people he had taught before. He didn't mention my father, who graduated from Taft in 1944, and my curiosity was aroused. After class, I asked Mr. Douglas if he knew my father. He said, yes, my face looked familiar. From that day on, I and every other Taftie who has been taught by Mr. Douglas have had a very special teacher-student relationship. Mr. Douglas wrote on both of my term comments that I was a pleasure to have in class. My answer to that is, through my 9 years of schooling and various teachers, it is the greatest pleasure I've ever had to have him teach me. I know that my brother Stephen, who hopes to come to Taft in 2 years, will not have Mr. Douglas. I only wish you will have somebody almost as good and half as nice as Mr. Douglas is. There will never be another Mr. Douglas. Goodbye, sir, and good luck.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, it's a remarkable renewing process, isn't it? Where we see and feel the generations move through this remarkable institution. President Kennedy used to refer to the H.G. Wells statement that human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. We're lucky in our school, we're lucky, I guess, in our society, that in that race we have some very skilled people who are working for us. We have now at the Taft School a young, dynamic leader, a warm and effective person, rich with promise, a very worthy successor to Horace Taft and to Paul Cruikshank, our own headmaster, Lance Odden.
Somewhere I have a list of the faculty who are in attendance tonight, and I think that it is appropriate that I introduce them to you. I can't seem to find that list at the moment. In that headmasters are not only queer people, as Paul Cruikshank has suggested, but sometimes they're forgetful. The evening is obviously an extremely important one for Ed Douglas and for the Taft School, and I think that as we honor Ed symbolically, we honor the faculty of our school who really make the institution what it is. And as a result of that, what I would like to do, in that sense of opinion on my part, I would like to introduce to you just briefly each of the faculty members who made the trip down from Watertown with us this afternoon to be with you here tonight. Fred and Dinny Janung. As you know, Fred is our Director of Development, has worked wonders in the annual funds in recent years and has helped it keep us a solvent institution. Fred and Dinny, will you please stand up? As master in the English department for many, many years, and now the senior master of that department, a man who was secretary of the Alumni Association for many years, probably as well known to the alumni body as any member of the faculty today, here with his wife Peg, Dick Lovelace. Dick, the Director of Studies, the individual responsible for the design of our curriculum and placing our young men and women. I note tonight that we have not paid much attention to the fact that Ed spent 40 years of his life molding men and 3 molding men and women. And I think I can say, as a parenthetical remark, based on some of our conversations that we've had as we've traveled around the country, that he has enjoyed molding women every bit as much as he has molding men. And I can assure you that they've also provided him with some experiences that were rather different than those that you have. I don't think that there's a student here or Taft alumnus here who ever kissed Ed Douglas. There are undergraduates at the school today who have, upon occasion, done that for whatever reason. So you see, Paul, we can accuse some of the faculty of being a little queer from time to time, too. The other thing that girls have done for him, which I doubt that very many of you have in your time at Taft, and if any of you have, actually, I'd like to see you outside after this evening is over with. But this year, when Ed turned 65, the girls in his class baked him a cake, and they sang him happy birthday and then kissed him when he came in. And as I said, all those of you who can equal that experience, I really would like to see afterwards. That's by way of a parenthetical remark. I was in the midst of introducing Al Reef, who is our Director of Studies. Al, will you please stand up? This is the man responsible for college placement. There was reference tonight to the great football team of 1935. We haven't had a great number of great football teams between 1935 and today. I think there was the team of 43, which was an extremely successful one, in 49, again in 61. But this year, for the first time since 1961, and really for the first time since 1935, we had a championship football team at Taft. It is coached by our able athletic director, Larry Stone, who is here with his lovely wife, Lou. Lou and Larry. Chad Harris of the class of 1966 is here. He is the photographer tonight. He is an instructor in the science department, a very able young man. Chad, where are you? And last, but hardly least, for me, the First Lady of Taft, my wife, Patsy. I want to tell a kind of peculiar story. It is distinctly personal. It's probably a somewhat emotional story for me, actually, as you might sense. It goes back to PC's days at school, and as he indicated, that is now well over 11 years ago. And in fact, this story occurred in the spring of 1961 when I graduated from college. At that time, I got a fellowship to teach English at Chun Chi University in Hong Kong. And I was headed there in the late summer of 1961 when a cholera epidemic struck Hong Kong, and they closed the doors to immigrants such as myself, and I had to wire Chun Chi College and ask them what it was that I should do with the fellowship that I had won. And they said, very gratefully, that they appreciated my interest and wondering what I should do. They had to fill the fellowship in order to have somebody teach English that year, and therefore I would have to defer until 1962. Well, that left me in September of that year without a job. I had always wanted to be a teacher. I had not applied to graduate school because of the fact that I was convinced I wanted to teach. I wanted to take this opportunity in Hong Kong. I could not get into school, obviously, at that late date. Nobody hires teachers in September of the academic year. And so it was that I returned home to my hometown, Princeton, somewhat at a loss as to what to do. I bumped into a Taft alumnus one day on the street, a man named Nat Smith, who is now a teacher at Andover, and told Nat of my plight. And he said, well, that he sympathized with me, but he wondered why I was sitting around bemoaning this plight when I might well get in my car and go around and present myself to some schools and find out whether or not I might be able to find a job. He said sometimes people get sick, sometimes they die, sometimes there are unusual circumstances which require that headmasters hire people at the last moment, so why don't you take a look around? I thought that was rather inspiring advice. I was desperate. So I borrowed my father's car. He was wondering how I was going to pay him for the gasoline, which was a lot cheaper then, but he still was wondering. In any case, I decided, inspired by Nat Smith, that I might as well try the Taft School, where he had served as a teacher as well as graduating for a year or two. So about the 8th or 9th of September in 1961, I drove up to Watertown to see Paul Cruikshank, unbeknownst to Paul Cruikshank. Because one of the things that Nat had told me was if I ever called, Mr. Cruikshank would never see me, nor would any other headmaster, because, of course, he doesn't have any needs, and he won't know that he needs you until he meets you. So you better meet him first and then tell him that you're looking for a job. So I got in my car and I went to Watertown, and as those of you who know Paul Cruikshank well, I picked the wrong day of the week. I arrived on Thursday afternoon. Now, Thursday, Paul was a very wise man in those days, and he still is, except for the fact that sometimes he picks the wrong golf partner, as he did once when he asked me to play with him last year, I think with the hope that we might win a little money, and I disappointed him immensely. But in any case, Paul was out on the golf course, as was his habit, on Thursday afternoons. I arrived at the school and found virtually no one there. The school was to open the following Wednesday. The switchboard lady sent me down to Miss Riley, Paul Cruikshank's secretary, who, through her good wisdom and good judgment, I might add, has continued at the school and is now my secretary. She explained to me that Mr. Cruikshank was playing golf, and that she then asked me what I was interested in seeing him about, and I said that I'd like to teach at the Taft School. Well, she said, you realize, of course, that the faculty was filled last March, and there's no chance for somebody such as you to join the faculty at this time. And I explained that I understood that, but that I did think that I had some characteristics that the school might be interested in, and that I would like to have a chance to see the headmaster. Well, as it turned out, something happened, and I did engage her in some conversation. And as all of those of you who are in the business world know, to some degree or another, our secretaries do run our lives. And I think that she had an unusual influence over Paul Cruikshank, and I state very openly that she does have an unusual influence over me at this day. In any case, something happened in this conversation, and she decided that she wouldn't screen the rest of the administration from me. And she then told me that one Edwin C. Douglas was the man on duty that particular day, the assistant to the headmaster. She said he wasn't there, but she'd be glad to call him for me. So she called Ed, and I heard one half of this conversation only. The conversation ran something like this: Ed, there's a young man here who is looking for a job. And the other half must have run, what's the matter with that blankety-blank son of a gun? He ought to know better. First-rate schools don't hire at this time of the year. And then there was, but I think that you ought to see him, from Miss Riley, and a little more conversation, and then Miss Riley suggested to me that I could go over and see Mr. Douglas, the assistant to the headmaster. So I got in my car. I wasn't quite sure what the message was that I was getting at this point, and I went over to see Ed. She gave me directions on how to get there, and I arrived at his house, and there was this Marine DI sergeant-looking fellow, stripped to the waist, sweating like a bandit, working on his garden. Well, I didn't know then what I know now, and what some of you who once or twice might have gotten into trouble during your years at Taft, but some of the most important decisions in Ed Douglas's life have been made in his garden. And some, if not many, students have been saved through work in that garden while on penalty crew. And it is a sure thing that my professional career was, at least momentarily, saved in that garden that afternoon. Ed was from the outset very gracious, and in a very short matter of time, he and I struck up a rather remarkable conversation, considering the fact that we had never met before. He spent, I think, the better part of 2 to 3 hours with me that day, explaining to me first why I was going about things in the wrong fashion, and then telling me how I might find a job, even at this late date in the year, if I went around to some of the other schools around and did exactly what I was doing at Taft. Because he said if you call up, they'll say no, but if you arrive in person, they might have a need. Well, at the end of this wonderful session with him, I was really confused as to what was going on at the Taft School. Everybody was very gracious after a period of time and said there was no room in the inn. So I decided that they were diplomatic, but were really telling me no. I got in my father's car. I went back to New York City, where I took out one Patsy Kearney, now my wife, and in a somewhat unhappy state, confused, bewildered, we went out to dinner. I have to confess to having indulged myself slightly that evening in sorrow at my busted career. I stayed out very late dancing, and in those days, it was a rather different world. You remember, men didn't stay with women unless they were married, and so at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I had to get in my father's car and go home to Princeton, which I thought was a bleak idea even then, and I do understand. I do understand why people make other arrangements now. By that I convey no approval, however. In any case, I arrived home, I think, somewhere in the vicinity of 5 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed, and at 8:03, my mother got me out of bed and said, there's Miss Riley on the telephone. Do you know who she is? And I said, yes, I do. She's from the Taft School. And she said, well, she'd like to talk to you. I wasn't too sure whether that was a good idea or not, because, I wasn't quite sure I was going to be able to talk. But I did. I went to the telephone, and Miss Riley said to me, Mr. Oden, Mr. Cruikshank would like to see you at 11:30 this morning. I wasn't sure whether to commit suicide or to give it a go. If I had been a little bit more wide awake, I would have said no. But I was still a little foggy, so I said, I'll be there. In those days, it took 3.5 hours to go from Princeton to Watertown, and I had 3 hours and 25 minutes to make the trip in. Well, I made it, one way or the other. I'm not quite sure how well groomed I was when I arrived in Paul's office, but I had managed to shave, put on a coat and tie, and thought that I looked reasonably presentable. I went in, and we had a very interesting conversation. I don't suppose that anyone in the audience has ever had one of these conversations, but it was one of those where every time I said something, the words came out in the wrong order. Paul asked me to tell me a little bit about myself. I thought he must have known something about what had happened the night before. And in fact, I don't think he did, but then headmasters are wise men, so you can never tell. But the short of the story is that I thought I had a terrible interview with Paul. And when we got through, he called Fred Clark in, who was then director of development, and asked Fred to show me around the school, which I thought might be a euphemism for show you the door. But at any rate, Fred showed me quickly around the school, and I came back about 10 minutes later, and there was Ed leaving Mr. Cruikshank's office, and I walked in, and Mr. Cruikshank said to me that he would like to offer me a job. Now, I was naive at that point, but my immediate conclusion was that the true story of the Cruikshank administration was that Ed Douglas made all the key decisions. I subsequently learned that that was not the case. But I was hired. Now, I give Ed, I would say 90% credit for hiring me, my secretary 9%, and Paul Cruikshank 1%. And the 1% credit that I give to him is not for being appointed to the school, but to what he appointed me and what he paid for it. I was appointed assistant to the manager of the school store with no teaching responsibilities whatsoever, and was paid $2,500. So as you can see, I have been forever grateful to both Paul and Ed ever since that moment. In all seriousness, my career in education, I really do believe, is directly tied to Ed's lobbying in my behalf at that time. And that's a debt of gratitude that I will always have. I don't have to apologize for having gone more than 3 or 4 minutes that I told Fred that he could tell everybody else that they could have. I didn't tell him how much to tell me. I do want to tell one quick story that has to do with Horace Taft, not the pretender for the presidency of Yale College or any other office to which he might aspire with Bob Sweet as his campaign manager. But I do want to tell a story that I learned last summer for the first time, which apparently was a story that the king, Horace Taft, used to tell to headmasters who were young and new and fresh, such as myself, when he thought they were overly egotistical or sure of themselves as they set out in their early years of headmastering. Now, many of you will remember that Horace Taft liked to tell stories that may have been apocryphal, but were about himself, to illustrate points that he believed in a great deal. And this story, truthful or not, was clearly told by Horace Taft on many occasions, and was told to me by Dexter Strong, who was for many years headmaster of Pomfret and then later Lakeside Academy out in Seattle. And Horace Taft told Dexter this story. He said that in the 1920s he received a letter from a Taft graduate who was in the senior year at Yale University requesting help seeking a position as a headmaster of a secondary boarding school. And Horace Taft was somewhat taken aback by this young man's brashness and wrote back saying that he thought it might be more appropriate if the young man began by applying for a position as a schoolmaster rather than as the headmaster of the school. And the young man from Yale wrote back to Horace Taft and said that based on his years at the school, he could see that any fool could be a headmaster, but that it took great talent to be a good schoolmaster. And so, therefore, he was going to apply for a job that he thought he was infinitely qualified for, and that was to be a headmaster. And after being a headmaster for a period of time, he would try to become a schoolmaster. Now, obviously, Horace Taft had some real thought in that story, and I think it is a telling one. For those of us who are headmasters, I think that we often miss our days as schoolmasters, and we also understand that the greatness of any institution is absolutely dependent upon the quality of the people that work for you in your faculty. For 43 years, Ed Douglas has been the best teacher, one of the best coaches, the finest dean of the Taft School, friend of many, many alumni, friend of many students, a man who, incredibly enough, has, in the course of his years at the school, either coached or taught or come into contact in one way or another 3/4 of the alumni body of the Taft School, a man whose impact on Horace Taft, Paul Cruikshank, John Estey, and myself has been immense, a man who stands as a model of what Horace Taft thought a great schoolmaster ought to be. It is my very great privilege to present to you tonight the man that I consider to be the finest schoolmaster in the history of the Taft School, Edwin C. Douglas.
Thank you ever so much. For those of you to whom I haven't had a chance to say hi, I do it now, and I blame it on members of the class of 1933 who pinned me in against the bar over there, much against my will, of course. Also, I would like to take this chance to thank the Oriokos for particularly the last little ditty, and I suspect Will Miller put that one together, and this young fellow who was out at the end here who's gone back home in order to be ready for my afternoon geometry class tomorrow. And I warned him before he got up here that I was still his teacher until June 1st, and he better watch his manners and his language. I thought he did it very well. I'm reminded now, and my mind zooms back 43 years ago, more than that, just a few months, to my interview down at Taft with Horace Taft. Lou Davidson said they used to call him HD until somebody crowned him and made him the king, but those of us who knew him in those days thought of him as the king. And I wrote finally and accepted Mr. Taft's offer to come to Taft. And he wrote back, acknowledging my acceptance. And I'll never forget the last sentence in his lovely letter. He said, "Ned," and that was his nickname for me, "Ned, I sincerely hope you never have any regrets for having come to us." And now as I look back on it all, I never had any regrets. It's been fun. Every day has been a memorable one. The king lives on in the Douglas family because our son, Edwin C. Jr., wouldn't answer to Edwin or Dougie. He's Ned. And so every day of Gene's and my life, we see Horace Taft in the household. To have started a career in schoolmastering under the king was without any question the most memorable beginning any schoolmaster could have ever had. A man of great warmth, feeling for human beings, and for all the things that these great generous people up here have said about me in that regard. It came from Mr. Taft and his helping me to understand what it was to be working with people. Then I know I matured both as a person and in my profession under the honorable gentleman down at the end of the table here. He had to make some hard decisions because all of these accolades that have been paid me for what I've meant to the world of mathematics and the world of private secondary and public secondary education, and now I find I'm supposed to be becoming an authority on elementary education, are due to Paul's wisdom and making the hard decision that would let me be away from school to do all these things. And I never have had the opportunity to publicly thank him for those decisions and for how much they have meant to me in my professional career. And on top of this, nobody can talk about the Cruikshank era without mentioning Edith. And my wife and I are always and will always be eternally indebted to her and to Paul for learning the true measure of graciousness and standards. Under John Estey, I saw the academic offerings of the school zoom, and I became the only honest rebel and true nonconformist. As you can see from my white button-down Oxford shirts, my narrow chalice tie, and the hairstyling that I insist upon wearing. And I tell Lance and Patsy that I've really mellowed under their regime, and Lance says, "Come on, Ed, get off it. The girls have got you wrapped around their collective little fingers." And you know, he's true. It's true. But they're nice fingers. And I accused Joe Cunningham, our admissions man, of having extremely high standards of feminine pulchritude, not only facial beauty, but they're well endowed, gentlemen. And now that I've said that, you can see that I'm a lecherous old man, and it really is time for me to get the hell out of there. But in any event, I always remember that wonderful movie of the school that Lowell Thomas narrates. I think it was made in 1949. And thank heavens somebody had the wisdom at one stage of the game to get a movie, black and white, of Horace Taft talking. And he expounds on his theories of education and various other things, and then, obviously answering a rhetorical question, he says, "The school? Well, of course, it's been my life." And I think the Oriocos in their last number picked up that situation. Of course, it's been my life. If I had the opportunity to do it over again, I would do it exactly the same way. And it's been fun. It's gone fast. Because when you enjoy what you're doing, time speeds by. And if I can steal from an R.L. Delderfield novel's title, I can truly say this from the bottom of my heart. It has been a rare privilege and a distinct honor to have served you all my days. Your affection, your devotion, Gene, Ned, and I will always cherish. And thank you so much for coming tonight. And if you come to Watertown, we bought a house there. It has a nice rumpus room downstairs, and I'm practicing to be a good bartender. We'll buy you a drink.